My husband announced he was leaving me right after I settled his family's $80,000 debt. His mother even had the nerve to smirk and say they never liked me, but little did they know what I was planning. I sat there staring at the zeros on my bank statement, a hollow victory etched across my face. $80,000 gone just like that. But it wasn't the money that stung the most, it was her words cutting deeper than any financial loss ever could. "We never liked you anyway." My mother-in-law's smirk was burned into my memory, a cruel ending to what I believed was a loving marriage. Yet as I watched my husband walk away, something inside me changed. They thought this was the end, but they had no idea it was only the beginning. Hey beautiful people. Your support means the world to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. When I first met Jack, it felt like a scene ripped from a romantic comedy. I was struggling with a mountain of books at the university library, and he swooped in to save the day just as they were about to topple over. Our eyes met, and I swear I could hear an orchestra swelling in the background. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and I was instantly smitten. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was a simple affair, a picnic in the park where we had our first date. When he got down on one knee, I didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes," I exclaimed, throwing my arms around him. I thought I knew what true happiness felt like at that moment. The wedding was small but beautiful. Jack's family seemed welcoming enough, if a bit reserved. His mother Eleanor hugged me and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." I was over the moon, ready to start our life together. The first few years of our marriage were blissful. We were young in love and full of dreams. Jack had just started his career in finance and I was working as a teacher. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We talked about buying a house, starting a family. All those things young couples dream about. But beneath the surface, financial pressures were mounting. Jack's salary wasn't increasing as quickly as we'd hoped, and the cost of living in the city was skyrocketing. We started to argue more about money, about our future plans. Still, I believed we could weather any storm together. Then came the night that changed everything. Jack came home late, his tie loosened, a haunted look in his eyes. I knew something was wrong before he even spoke. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something." My heart raced as he explained that his family, his parents and his younger sister, were in deep financial trouble. Years of poor investments and lavish spending had finally caught up with them. They were facing bankruptcy, possible legal troubles, and the loss of their home. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. $80,000, Jack replied, his eyes pleading. "If we can help them clear this debt, they can avoid bankruptcy. They can start over." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. $80,000 was more than our combined annual salary. It was our future house, our future children's college fund, our safety net. All gone in an instant. But I loved Jack, and despite their cool demeanor towards me, I thought of his family as my own. So I made a decision that would alter the course of our lives forever. "We'll do it," I said, taking Jack's hand. "We'll help them." The next few months were a blur of financial maneuvering. We emptied our savings account, took out a second mortgage on our small apartment, and I even sold the jewelry my grandmother had left me. Every penny we could scrape together went towards clearing Jack's family's debt. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. I took on extra tutoring jobs in the evenings and on weekends. Jack worked overtime, coming home late most nights. We barely saw each other, but I told myself it was worth it. We were saving his family, strengthening our bond, proving our love. The day we made the final payment, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. It was over. We had done it. Jack's family was saved from financial ruin, and now we could focus on rebuilding our own lives. I expected gratitude, maybe a family dinner to celebrate our collective perseverance. Instead, I got silence. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the sacrifice we'd made. When I brought it up to Jack, he brushed it off. "They're proud people, Sarah," he said. "It's hard for them to accept help, even from family. Give them time." So I gave them time. Weeks turned into months. Our own financial situation remained precarious, but I held on to hope. We had overcome this massive hurdle together. Surely our love could conquer anything. Then came the day that shattered my world. I was in the kitchen trying to figure out how to stretch our meager groceries into another week of meals, when Jack walked in. There was something different about him. A coldness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "we need to talk." Those words, those dreaded words that never precede anything good. "I'm leaving," he continued as if he were discussing the weather. "I can't do this anymore. The financial stress, the responsibility. It's too much. I need a fresh start." I stood there frozen, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. But we did this together," I stammered. "We sacrificed everything for your family. We can get through this." Jack shook his head. "There is no anymore, Sarah. I'm sorry, but this is how it has to be." In a daze, I watched as he packed a bag, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. After everything we'd been through, everything we'd sacrificed, how could he just walk away? As Jack headed for the door, a thought struck me. "Wait," I said, my voice shaking. "What about your family? The debt we paid off?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "They'll be fine," he said flatly. "You should talk to them." And just like that, he was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the closed door. Minutes, hours? Time seemed to lose all meaning. Eventually, I found myself picking up the phone, dialing the number I knew by heart. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, answered on the third ring. "Hello." Her voice was cool, distant. "Eleanor," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's Sarah. Jack. Jack just left. He said I should talk to you about the debt we paid off." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Did you really think that money would buy you a place in our family? We never liked you anyway." Jack finally came to his senses. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Eleanor's words echoed in my head, each repetition like a knife twisting in my heart. "We never liked you anyway. We never liked you anyway. We never liked you anyway." As the full weight of the betrayal crashed over me, something inside me began to change. The hurt, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all. It all began to crystallize into something harder, colder. They thought they had one. They thought they could use me, discard me, and walk away unscathed. But as I stood there in my empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought I knew, a new emotion began to take root. Rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. And with that rage came a promise to myself. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had no idea what I was capable of, but they were about to find out. As the rage coursed through my veins, I found myself pacing the apartment, my mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all threatened to consume me. But beneath the chaos, a cold, calculating voice began to emerge. I stopped in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled, but there was a steely glint in her gaze that I'd never seen before. This woman wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, and she was out for blood. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to think rationally. I needed to understand the full extent of what had happened. Only then could I plan my next move. I sat down at my small dining table and opened my laptop. With trembling fingers, I logged into our joint bank account. The balance stared back at me, a pitiful fraction of what it once was. I began to scroll through the transaction history, piecing together the financial puzzle of our demise. It had started small, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, transfers to Jack's personal account that he had explained away as investments or family emergencies. I had trusted him implicitly, never questioning, always supportive. What a fool I'd been. As the amounts grew larger, so did the frequency of the transfers. The final payment, a staggering sum that had emptied our savings account, had been made just 2 weeks ago. The timing was no coincidence. They had waited until the money was safely in their possession before discarding me like yesterday's trash. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They had played me perfectly. The loving husband, the welcoming family. It had all been an act, an elaborate con to solve their financial woes at my expense. But their perfect plan had one fatal flaw: they had underestimated me. I spent the next few days in a frenzy of activity. I canceled our joint credit cards, changed the locks on the apartment, and consulted a lawyer about my options. The news wasn't good. Without proof of fraud, the money I had willingly given to Jack's family was considered a gift in the eyes of the law. I had no legal recourse to reclaim it. The lawyer's words echoed in my head as I left his office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but there's nothing we can do. My advice would be to cut your losses and move on." Move on, as if it were that simple, as if I could just forget the years of my life I had wasted, the dreams I had sacrificed, the future that had been stolen from me. Moving on wasn't an option, but moving forward that I could do. I threw myself into work, picking up every extra shift and tutoring job I could find. By day, I was the perfect image of a woman trying to rebuild her life after a painful divorce. I smiled at my colleagues, assured my friends that I was doing fine, and presented a brave face to the world. But at night, alone in the apartment that now felt too big and too empty, I plotted. I started with research, hours upon hours spent hunched over my laptop, digging into every aspect of Jack's family's lives. Their businesses, their social circles, their dirty little secrets. I left no stone unturned. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I made a startling discovery. A small news article buried in the archives of a local paper caught my eye. It detailed the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of Jack's uncle Robert 5 years ago. Robert had been wealthy, eccentric, and estranged from the family for years. His death had been ruled an accident, but the article hinted at possible foul play. The pieces began to fall into place. The timing of Robert's death coincided with the beginning of the family's financial troubles. Had they somehow been involved? Had their desperate need for money driven them to the unthinkable? I saved the article along with dozens of other, potentially incriminating pieces of information I had uncovered. Slowly but surely, I was building a dossier on the family that had ruined my life. Every scrap of evidence, every whisper of scandal, it all went into my growing file of ammunition. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a way to use this knowledge to bring them down. And for that I needed help. I reached out to an old college friend, Alex, who now worked as a private investigator. Over coffee, I shared a sanitized version of my story, painting myself as a concerned ex-wife who feared her husband's family might be involved in illegal activities. Alex listened intently, his brow furrowed. "This is serious stuff, Sarah," he said when I had finished. "If even half of what you suspect is true, we're talking about major fraud, possibly even worse. Are you sure you want to get involved in this?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm already involved, Alex. I just want the truth." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But Sarah," he added, his voice softening, "be careful. These people have already shown they're capable of hurting you. Don't do anything rash." I thanked him for his concern, all the while knowing that rash didn't even begin to cover what I had in mind. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. By day, I continued my charade of the healing divorcee. I even started attending a support group for people who had been betrayed by their partners, partly to maintain my cover, and partly to gather more ideas for my revenge. But my nights were devoted to my mission. Alex came through with a treasure trove of information, confirming many of my suspicions and uncovering even more dirt on the family. Financial irregularities, shady business deals, and yes, more questions about Uncle Robert's convenient death. Armed with this knowledge, I began to formulate my plan. It would take time, patience, and nerves of steel, but I was prepared to do whatever it took. The first step was to establish a new identity. Sarah Thompson, the naive and trusting wife, was dead. In her place, I created Samantha Taylor, a savvy businesswoman with a keen eye for investment opportunities. I used a chunk of my dwindling savings to invest in a new wardrobe, a sleek new hairstyle, and even subtle makeup techniques to alter my appearance just enough. I practiced a new way of speaking, a new way of carrying myself. Samantha was confident, assertive, everything that Sarah had not been. With my new persona in place, I began to infiltrate the social circles that Jack's family frequented. Charity galas, business networking events, exclusive clubs. Anywhere they might be, Samantha Taylor was there too, always on the periphery, never drawing too much attention, but always watching, listening, gathering more information. It was at one of these events that I had my first close encounter with Eleanor since that fateful phone call. I was at the bar, sipping a glass of champagne, when I heard her unmistakable laugh. Turning slightly, I saw her holding court with a group of society ladies, every inch the gracious matriarch. Our eyes met for a brief moment across the crowded room. I saw a flicker of confusion cross her face, quickly replaced by dismissal. She didn't recognize me. To her, I was just another face in the crowd, not worth a second glance. Little did she know that this face would soon become her worst nightmare. As I watched Eleanor turn back to her admirers, a cold smile played across my lips. The pieces were falling into place. Very soon I would be ready to strike. But first I needed to secure my own financial future. The money I had lost might be gone, but I was determined to recoup my losses and then some. I threw myself into learning about investing, spending hours studying market trends and financial reports. I started small, making cautious investments with what little money I had left. To my surprise, I discovered I had a knack for it. My investments began to grow slowly but steadily. As my confidence grew, so did my ambition. I started taking calculated risks, leveraging my growing knowledge and the inside information I had gathered on various companies. Within months, I had not only recovered my initial investment, but was starting to see significant returns. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very skills I was using to rebuild my wealth were the same ones that Jack and his family had exploited for their own gain. But unlike them, I wasn't driven by greed. Every dollar I earned was another step closer to my ultimate goal. 1 year to the day after Jack had walked out of my life, I stood in my new apartment, looking out over the city skyline. The woman reflected in the window was unrecognizable from the broken shell I had been 12 months ago. Samantha Taylor was a force to be reckoned with, a woman with the means and the will to bring down those who had wronged her. I raised my glass in a silent toast to my own reflection. "Happy anniversary," I murmured, a predatory smile playing across my lips. The time for preparation was over. Tomorrow the real game would begin. As I lowered my glass, the weight of the moment settled over me. 1 year of meticulous planning, of reinventing myself, of lying in wait. Now, on the anniversary of my betrayal, it was time to set my plan in motion. The cruel revelation that had shattered my world would pale in comparison to what I had in store for them. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that had been building for months. I dressed carefully in a tailored black suit that screamed power and confidence, the armor of Samantha Taylor. As I applied my makeup, I studied my reflection. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable from the naive teacher who had given everything for love. Good. That woman was dead. My first stop was a small cafe across town, far from my usual haunts. I'd arranged to meet Alex there, away from prying eyes. He was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. "You sure about this, Sarah?" he asked as I slid into the seat across from him. Even after a year, he struggled to call me Samantha. "Once you start down this road, there's no turning back." I met his concerned gaze with steely determination. "I'm sure, Alex. They took everything from me. It's time they learn the cost of their actions." He nodded slowly, sliding the envelope across the table. "Everything you asked for is in here. Financial records, communication logs, witness statements about Robert's death. It's all circumstantial, but it's enough to start asking questions." I finished for him. "Thank you, Alex. I couldn't have done this without you." As I stood to leave, he caught my wrist. "Sarah, Samantha, be careful. These people, they're dangerous. If they realize what you're doing." I gave him a small, cold smile. "Don't worry about me, Alex. I'm not the same woman they thought they could discard. I'm ready for whatever comes next." With the envelope tucked safely in my briefcase, I made my way to my next appointment. Over the past year, I'd cultivated a relationship with Janet Moore, an ambitious young journalist always on the lookout for her big break. We met in a busy coffee shop, the buzz of conversation providing cover for our meeting. "Miss Taylor," Janet greeted me eagerly, "you said you had a story for me." I nodded, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. Financial fraud, tax evasion, and possible involvement in a suspicious death, all tied to one of the city's most prominent families." Janet's eyes widened as she pocketed the drive. This is big. Are you sure about your sources? Absolutely, I assured her. Every piece of information has been verified. Of course, I'll need to remain anonymous. Of course, Janet agreed quickly. If this checks out, this could be the story of the year. I left Janet poring over the files, my heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. The first domino had been set in motion. Now I just had to wait for it to fall. The next part of my plan required a more personal touch. I'd spent months ingratiating myself into the same social circles as Jack's family, always careful to stay just on the periphery of their awareness. Tonight was a charity gala that I knew Eleanor never missed. The perfect stage for our first real confrontation. As I entered the opulent ballroom, I felt eyes turn my way. Samantha Taylor had become known in these circles as a savvy businesswoman with deep pockets and a generous spirit. Exactly the type of person Eleanor loved to cultivate for her pet projects. I made my way through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I could see Eleanor holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by her usual coterie of sycophants. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into her line of sight. It took a moment for recognition to flicker in her eyes. When it did, I saw a brief flash of shock quickly masked by her usual haughty disdain. Well, well, she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of those around her. Look who decided to crawl out of whatever hole she'd been hiding in. Sarah, isn't it? Jack's little mistake. I felt the eyes of the group on me, curiosity and mild disdain in their gazes. They were expecting me to crumble, to run away in tears like the weak woman they thought I was. Instead, I smiled, cold and sharp as a knife's edge. Eleanor, I replied, my voice steady and clear. How lovely to see you again, although I'm afraid you seem to have me confused with someone else. I'm Samantha Taylor. I extended my hand, noting with satisfaction how her eyes widened at the expensive watch on my wrist. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she shook mine, her eyes darting around the group. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to play this unexpected development. Of course, she stammered, her usual poise faltering. My mistake. Welcome, Miss Taylor. Are you new to our little circle? Relatively, I replied smoothly. I've only recently moved my business interests to this area. I must say I've heard so much about your family's ventures. Perhaps we could discuss them sometime. I'm always looking for new investment opportunities. Eleanor's face paled slightly at my words, a flicker of fear passing behind her eyes. Yes, perhaps. If you'll excuse me, I see someone I must speak with. As she hurried away, I could feel the curious gazes of the group on me. I gave them an enigmatic smile before melting back into the crowd. The seed had been planted in the crowd's mind, and now all I had to do was watch it grow. Over the next few days, I obsessively followed the news. Janet didn't disappoint. On a Tuesday morning, the story exploded onto the front page of the city's most respected newspaper. Prominent family implicated in financial fraud and death investigation, the headline screamed. From my apartment, I watched the story spread like wildfire. By noon, it was dominating every news channel. And by evening, federal investigators were publicly announcing a formal probe into the family's finances. My phone vibrated with a text from Alex. It's happening. Are you okay? I quickly typed back. Better than okay. This is just the beginning. As satisfying as it was to witness the carefully constructed image of this family beginning to crumble, I knew this was only the opening shot in what promised to be a protracted and bitter campaign. They would fight back, of course. They had money, connections, influence. But so did I, and unlike them, I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The next morning, I received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but I had a strong feeling I knew who it was. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice carefully neutral. You think you're clever, don't you, Sarah? Jack's voice was tight, barely concealing his rage. You think you can just waltz back into our lives and destroy everything we've built? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. I'm sorry, who is this? Don't play games with me, Sarah, he snarled. I know it was you behind that article. What do you want? Money. Is that it? You want your precious $8,000 back? Oh, Jack, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. This is about justice. This is about consequences. You and your family thought you could use me and throw me away like garbage. You're about to learn how wrong you were. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jack spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost pleading. Sarah, please, whatever you think you're doing, it's not too late to stop. We can talk about this. We can make things right. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the old Sarah, the woman who had loved this man, who had believed in the inherent goodness of people. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes as he walked away, the cruelty in Eleanor's voice as she dismissed me. No, Jack, I said firmly. It is too late. Far, far too late. You made your choice a year ago. Now it's time to face the consequences. I ended the call, my heart pounding. There was no going back now. The gauntlet had been thrown down. The battle lines were drawn. As I looked out over the city, a city that had once seemed so big and overwhelming but now seemed like my personal chessboard, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. They thought they had seen the worst of me that day a year ago, broken and betrayed in my empty apartment. They had no idea what I was truly capable of, but they were about to find out. As I ended the call with Jack, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. The initial shock of my reappearance had faded, and now the real game was about to begin. I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight, and I was prepared for whatever they might throw at me. The days following the publication of Janet's exposé were a whirlwind of activity. As I had anticipated, Jack's family mobilized their considerable resources to combat the allegations. Their PR team worked overtime, issuing statements that painted them as victims of a smear campaign. They hired the best lawyers money could buy, threatening lawsuits against anyone who dared to repeat the slanderous lies about their business dealings. But I was ready for them. Every denial they made, every threat they issued, only served to keep the story in the public eye. And with each passing day, more evidence seemed to surface, corroborating the initial claims and raising new questions. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, careful not to draw too much attention to myself. Samantha Taylor remained a peripheral figure, a successful businesswoman with no apparent connection to the unfolding drama. But behind the scenes, I was pulling strings, feeding carefully curated information to key players in the media and law enforcement. It was during this time that I experienced what I can only describe as a dark epiphany. As I sat in my apartment one evening, watching yet another news report about the investigation into Jack's family, I realized something fundamental had changed within me. The pain of betrayal, the burning desire for justice. These emotions had been my driving force for so long. But now, as I watched my carefully laid plans come to fruition, I felt something else. A cold, calculated satisfaction that went beyond mere revenge. I realized that I wasn't just seeking to right a wrong anymore. I was reshaping the world around me, bending it to my will. The power I now wielded, the ability to build people up or tear them down with a few well-placed words or actions, was intoxicating. For a moment, this realization frightened me. Had I become the very thing I despised? Was I any better than Jack and his family, manipulating others for my own ends? But then I thought of Eleanor's smirk, of Jack's cold dismissal, of the years of my life I had sacrificed for nothing. No, I decided I was not like them. They had acted out of greed and selfishness. I was delivering justice not just for myself but for all the others they had undoubtedly wronged over the years. With this new clarity of purpose, I redoubled my efforts. I reached out to my network of contacts, seeking any additional information that could be used against Jack's family. It was during one of these conversations that I stumbled upon something unexpected. An old business associate of Jack's father let slip a crucial piece of information, the existence of an offshore account that hadn't been mentioned in any of the financial records I had uncovered so far. This account, he hinted, was where the real skeletons in the family's closet were buried. I knew I had to get my hands on the details of this account, but doing so would require more than just my usual methods of information gathering. I would need to get physically close to the family to access their private records. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. A charity event was being held at the family's sprawling mansion, a transparent attempt to rehabilitate their tarnished image. As Samantha Taylor, I had received an invitation. It was time to step out of the shadows and into the lion's den. The night of the event, I dressed with particular care. A sleek black dress that hugged my curves, paired with subtle but expensive jewelry. I wanted to project an image of wealth and sophistication, someone who belonged in these rarefied circles. As I entered the mansion, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of nerves. This was the closest I had been to Jack and his family since that fateful day a year ago. But I steeled myself, slipping into the persona of Samantha Taylor like a second skin. I mingled with the other guests, carefully making my way closer to where Jack and Eleanor stood, greeting people with forced smiles. I could see the strain around their eyes, the tension in their postures. The ongoing investigation was clearly taking its toll. Finally, I found myself face to face with them. Jack's eyes widened in recognition, a mix of emotions flashing across his face. Shock, anger, and something that might have been regret. "Miss Taylor," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "How unexpected to see you here." I smiled, all warmth and charm. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Your family's charitable work is legendary." The slight pause before the last word was deliberate, a subtle reminder of the cloud hanging over them. Jack's jaw clenched, but he managed a stiff nod. "We appreciate your support, Miss Taylor. If you'll excuse us, we have other guests to greet." As they moved away, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. I was in the house now. For Phase 2, under the guise of looking for the restroom, I slipped away from the main party. The upper floors of the house were off-limits to guests, but that didn't deter me. I had come prepared with a small lockpicking kit concealed in my clutch. Heart pounding, I made my way to Jack's father's study. I knew from my research that this was where he kept his most sensitive documents. The lock on the door proved no challenge for my newfound skills. Once inside, I moved quickly, my eyes scanning for anything that might lead me to information about the offshore account. Time seemed to slow as I rifled through drawers and files, hyper-aware of every sound from the party below. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted a small safe hidden behind a painting. It was a long shot, but I had to try. To my surprise, the combination was easy to crack. The date of Jack's parents' anniversary. Some things never changed. Inside the safe, I found what I was looking for. Documents detailing the offshore account, along with records of transactions that painted a damning picture of the family's financial dealings. My hand shook slightly as I used my phone to quickly photograph each page. I had just replaced everything and was about to leave when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Panic surged through me as I realized I had lingered too long. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, finally ducking behind a heavy curtain just as the door opened. "I'm telling you, something's not right," I heard Jack's voice say. "She shouldn't be here." "Calm down," his father replied. "She's just another guest. We can't afford to make a scene, not with everything else going on." I held my breath as they moved around the room, praying they wouldn't notice anything out of place. After what felt like an eternity, they left, still arguing in hushed tones. I waited a few more minutes before slipping out of the study and making my way back to the party. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to appear calm and collected as I rejoined the other guests. As I left the mansion later that night, I felt a surge of triumph. I had what I needed now, the final piece of the puzzle that would bring Jack's family crashing down. But as I drove home, a sobering thought occurred to me. In my quest for revenge, I had crossed lines I never thought I would, breaking and entering theft of private documents. I was no longer just a wronged ex-wife seeking justice. I had become something else entirely. The realization should have troubled me more than it did. Instead, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had adapted, evolved into what I needed to be to see this through. As I walked into my apartment, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was a stranger, harder, colder, more determined than ever. "No turning back now," I whispered to my reflection. "The die is cast. Whatever happens next, I am committed to seeing this through to the bitter end." As I stood there staring at my reflection, I knew that the next phase of my plan needed to begin immediately. The information I had obtained from Jack's father's safe was a ticking time bomb, and I needed to use it strategically. The following morning, I woke up early, my mind already racing with plans. I knew that simply releasing the information about the offshore account would cause a splash, but it wouldn't be enough to bring down the entire family. I needed to craft a narrative, to set the stage in a way that would make the fall of Jack's family not just a possibility, but an inevitability. My first step was to reach out to Janet, the journalist who had broken the initial story, over a secure line. I hinted at new developments, stoking her curiosity without revealing too much. Keep your eyes open, I told her. Things are about to get very interesting. Next, I turned my attention to social media. Over the past year, I had cultivated a network of influential accounts across various platforms. Some were real people I had carefully befriended as Samantha Taylor. Others were carefully crafted personas I had created myself. Now it was time to put this network to use. I began by subtly seeding doubt about the family's denials of wrongdoing. A tweet here, a Facebook post there, all carefully worded to seem like innocent speculation rather than a coordinated attack. I watched with satisfaction as these posts began to gain traction, picked up and amplified by others who had their own reasons to distrust the wealthy and powerful. As this online whisper campaign grew, I turned my attention to more direct action. I had spent months documenting every questionable deal, every hint of impropriety I could find related to Jack's family. Now I began anonymously sending this information to relevant authorities, tax officials, financial regulators, even local law enforcement. I was careful to space out these revelations, to make it seem like multiple sources were coming forward independently. Each new piece of information I released was calculated to build on the last, creating a damning picture of corruption and deceit that spanned generations. All the while, I maintained my public persona as Samantha Taylor. I attended charity events, made strategic investments, and continued to build my reputation as a savvy businesswoman. To the outside world, I was completely disconnected from the growing scandal surrounding Jack's family. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating every move. I watched with a mix of satisfaction and cold detachment as the pressure on the family began to mount. News reports became more frequent and more critical. Whispers of criminal investigations grew louder. Former associates began to distance themselves, afraid of being caught in the fallout. Through my network of contacts, I heard that Jack and his family were starting to feel the strain. Their once solid facade was beginning to crack. Eleanor had been overheard having a heated argument with her husband at a restaurant, their voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. Jack had started drinking heavily, showing up to business meetings unkempt and irritable. It was during this time that I received an unexpected visit from Alex, my old friend and private investigator. He showed up at my apartment one evening, his face grave. "Sarah," he said, reverting to my old name despite my protests, "I need to know, how far are you planning to take this?" I invited him in, pouring us both a glass of wine before responding. "As far as necessary," I said simply. "They need to pay for what they've done." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that, I do. But Sarah, Samantha, whatever you want to call yourself now, this isn't just about exposing some financial misdeeds anymore. The stuff you've been digging up, the way you're releasing it, you're systematically destroying these people's lives." I felt a flicker of annoyance at his words. "And what about my life?" I countered. "They destroyed it without a second thought. Why should I show them any mercy?" "Because if you don't," Alex said quietly, "you might lose yourself in the process. I've seen it happen before. People get so focused on revenge that they become something they never meant to be." His words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. I thought about the woman I had seen in the mirror the night before, the stranger with cold eyes and a colder heart. For a moment I felt a pang of doubt. Was I going too far? But then I remembered Eleanor's smirk, Jack's casual cruelty as he walked out on me. The doubt hardened into resolve. "I appreciate your concern, Alex," I said, my voice steady. "But I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm prepared to face the consequences." Alex looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said as he stood to leave. "Just be careful. These people, they're not going to go down without a fight." After he left, I sat alone in my apartment, turning his words over in my mind. Alex was right about one thing. Jack's family wouldn't give up easily. They had too much to lose. I needed to be prepared for their counterattack. Over the next few weeks, I redoubled my efforts. I reached out to former employees of the family's businesses, offering anonymity in exchange for any information they might have. Many were hesitant at first, but as the public tide turned against their former employers, more and more began to come forward. Each new revelation was like a piece of a puzzle, fitting together to create a damning picture of decades of corruption, exploitation, and deceit. The offshore account I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. There were shell companies, fraudulent charities, even hints of connections to organized crime. As I compiled this information, I began to notice a pattern. Many of the family's worst excesses seemed to coincide with periods of financial strain. It was as if they viewed ethical behavior as a luxury they could only afford when times were good. This realization gave me an idea. If I could put enough financial pressure on the family, force them into a corner, they might make a desperate move, one that would expose their true nature to the world once and for all. With this in mind, I began to adjust my strategy. Instead of just exposing past misdeeds, I started to target their current income streams. Through my business connections, I quietly advised investors to pull out of the family's ventures. I used my social media network to start rumors about the stability of their companies. The effect was slow at first, but as the weeks went by, it began to snowball. Stock prices for companies associated with the family began to drop. Longtime business partners started to distance themselves. The once mighty financial empire that Jack's family had built began to show signs of crumbling. Throughout all of this, I maintained my cover as Samantha Taylor. I even reached out to Jack directly, offering my sympathies for the difficulties his family was facing. The conversation was tense, filled with unspoken accusations and barely concealed hostility. "I don't know what game you're playing," Jack said at one point, his voice low and angry. "But if you think you can take us down, you're sadly mistaken. We've weathered worse storms than this." I just smiled, my voice honey-sweet with false concern. "I'm sure you have, Jack. I'm just offering my support as a friend. After all, we all go through difficult times, don't we?" The look in his eyes as we ended the call told me everything I needed to know. He suspected my involvement, but he couldn't prove anything. More importantly, he was scared. The unshakable confidence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered look. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. The stage was set, the players were in position. Now it was time for the final act to begin. I walked to my window, looking out over the city that had once seemed so vast and impersonal. Now it felt like my chessboard, with Jack's family as the pieces I was methodically removing. "Check?" I whispered to myself, a small cold smile playing on my lips. "Your move." As I stood by the window, savoring the moment of anticipation, I knew that the time had come to launch my first major offensive. The groundwork had been laid, the tensions had been building, and now it was time to watch the first domino fall. The next morning, I put the final touches on a comprehensive dossier I had compiled. It contained irrefutable evidence of the family's financial fraud, including details of the offshore account I had discovered in Jack's father's safe. But more than that, it included a meticulously researched timeline that linked their fraudulent activities to several high-profile business failures in the city, companies that had gone bankrupt leaving hundreds jobless, all because of the Thompson family's greed. I sent this dossier to Janet, the journalist who had broken the initial story. I knew she would verify every detail before publishing, which would only lend more credibility to the exposé. Within hours, I received a call from Janet. Her voice was filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. This is incredible," she breathed. "If even half of this checks out, it's not just fraud we're talking about. It's a systematic dismantling of the city's economy for personal gain. How did you get all this?" I smiled to myself, pleased by her reaction. "I have my sources," I replied cryptically. "The important thing is, can you run with it?" "Can I? This is the story of a lifetime. But are you sure about this? Once this goes public, there's no going back. The Thompsons will be ruined." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hesitation. Was I really ready to destroy the family so completely? But then I remembered the cold dismissal in Jack's eyes, the cruel smirk on Eleanor's face. My resolve hardened. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "The public deserves to know the truth." The story broke the next day, splashed across the front page of every major newspaper, and leading every news broadcast. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media exploded with outrage. Longtime business associates publicly distanced themselves from the family, and within hours there were calls for a formal investigation. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my apartment, a glass of champagne in hand. It was surreal to see the fruits of my labor playing out on such a grand scale. The family's carefully constructed image was crumbling before my eyes, and I felt a surge of vindication. But I knew this was just the beginning. The Thompsons wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had to be prepared for their counterattack. Came sooner than I expected. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. "Hello?" Jack's voice came through, tight with barely controlled rage. "Sarah? Or should I say Samantha? I have to hand it to you. I didn't think you had it in you." I kept my voice cool and composed. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "Don't play dumb," he snarled. "We know you're behind this. I don't know how you got that information, but if you think you can take us down, you're sadly mistaken. We have resources you can't even imagine." "Is that a threat, Jack?" I asked, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. "Because from where I'm standing, you're not in much of a position to be making threats." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jack spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost pleading. "Sarah, please, whatever you think we've done to you. This isn't a conversation. It's a charade. Fix things." For a fleeting second, I glimpsed the Sarah of old, the one who loved this man. But then the memory of his glacial eyes as he walked away, the casual cruelty with which he dismantled our life, flooded back. My heart turned to stone. "Make things right?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, that ship sailed long ago. You made your choice a year ago. Now you get to savor the consequences." I severed the connection before he could retort, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew I'd just thrown down the gauntlet. The real war was about to begin. In the days that followed, the Thompsons scrambled to control the narrative. They unleashed a high-powered PR firm, issued denials of any wrongdoing, and threatened lawsuits against anyone who dared repeat the slanderous lies about their business dealings. But it was a futile effort. The evidence I had meticulously gathered was too comprehensive, too damning to be easily dismissed. Emboldened by the initial revelations, more whistleblowers emerged from the shadows. Former employees, business partners, even distant family members, all with tales of the Thompsons' misdeeds. The family's once unassailable social standing began to crumble. Invitations to elite events were rescinded. Longtime friends suddenly became scarce. Even their charitable foundation, once the cornerstone of their public image, came under intense scrutiny as questions arose about the true destination of the donations. I watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction, but I wasn't naive enough to lower my guard. This was merely the opening salvo. The Thompsons still possess considerable resources and connections. They wouldn't surrender without a fight. My suspicions were confirmed when I received a call from Alex, my trusted private investigator friend. "Sarah," he said, his voice laced with urgency, "you need to be careful. I'm hearing chatter that the Thompsons are hiring people to dig into your past. They're desperately searching for anything they can weaponize against you." A flicker of anxiety fluttered within me, but I quickly suppressed it. I had anticipated this move and taken precautions. "Let them dig," I replied, my voice steady. "Samantha Taylor's background is airtight. And Sarah Thompson? Well, she doesn't exist anymore." Alex sighed heavily. "Just watch your back, okay? These people are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment strategizing my next move. The first strike had exceeded my wildest expectations, but I knew it was just the beginning. The Thompsons were wounded, but far from defeated. And a wounded animal, as they say, is often the most dangerous. I retrieved my laptop and began to meticulously review my files. The offshore account I had uncovered was merely the tip of a colossal iceberg. There were still countless secrets hidden beneath the surface, countless connections to expose. I was determined to bring every last one of them to light. As I worked late into the night, I caught sight of my reflection in the darkened window. The woman who stared back at me was a far cry from the naive teacher who had once given everything for love. Her eyes were harder, her jaw set with unwavering determination. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had lost something of myself in this relentless quest for revenge. But then the memory of the pain, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of what had been done to me washed over me. No, I hadn't lost anything. I had evolved, become stronger. And I was just getting started. I turned back to my work, a small cold smile playing on my lips. The first strike had been successful, but the war was far from over. I was prepared to do whatever it took to win. As the first rays of dawn crept through my window, I closed my laptop, exhausted but exhilarated. The aftermath of my initial strike against the Thompsons was still unfolding, but I knew I couldn't afford to rest on my laurels. It was time to set in motion the next phase of my plan, the domino effect that would systematically dismantle the family's reputation and turn them against each other. I started by focusing on the weakest link in the family chain, Jack's younger sister, Emily. Through my network of contacts, I had learned that Emily had always felt overshadowed by her older brother and resentful of her parents' favoritism. She was the perfect target to exploit the cracks in the family's united front. Using one of my carefully crafted alternate personas, I reached out to Emily through social media. I posed as a sympathetic ear, someone who understood the pressures of being part of a high-profile family. Over the course of several days, I carefully cultivated a rapport with her, gaining her trust bit by bit. Once I felt the time was right, I began to plant seeds of doubt. I asked seemingly innocent questions about the family's business practices, expressed shock at the recent allegations, and wondered aloud how much Emily really knew about her family's dealings. I could sense her uncertainty growing with each conversation. Finally, after a particularly heated family argument that Emily had vented to me about, I made my move. I suggested that perhaps it was time for her to think about protecting herself, to consider coming forward with what she knew before she got caught in the crossfire. The effect was almost immediate. Within days, Emily had hired her own lawyer, separate from the family's legal team. Rumors began to circulate that she was considering making a deal with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. The family, once a united front, was beginning to fracture. But Emily was just the first domino. My next target was Jack's father, Richard Thompson. Through my investigations, I had uncovered evidence of an affair he had been having with a much younger woman. It wasn't just a simple indiscretion. Richard had been funneling company funds to set his mistress up in a lavish apartment and finance her extravagant lifestyle. I anonymously sent proof of the affair to Eleanor, Jack's mother. The evidence included financial records, photographs, and even a recording of Richard promising his mistress that he would leave Eleanor for her. I made sure the package was delivered when I knew Richard would be at home, maximizing the potential for a confrontation. The fallout was spectacular. Eleanor, always the picture of poise in public, lost her composure entirely. Witnesses reported hearing screaming matches from the Thompson mansion, and Richard was seen leaving the house with hastily packed bags, his face bruised. As news of the family's personal drama began to leak to the press, their carefully cultivated image of unity and moral superiority crumbled further. Business associates, already wary after the financial fraud allegations, began to distance themselves even more. The Thompson name, once a symbol of success and influence, was quickly becoming toxic. But I wasn't done yet. My next move targeted the heart of the family's financial empire. Using the information I had gathered about their offshore accounts and shell companies, I began to systematically expose their network of financial manipulation. I leaked documents to financial regulators, showing how the Thompsons had been evading taxes for years. I provided evidence to investigative journalists, revealing how they had been using their charitable foundation as a front for money laundering. With each new revelation, the noose tightened around the family's neck. The effect on their business interests was devastating. Share prices in Thompson-controlled companies plummeted. Partners pulled out of deals. Banks began calling in loans. The financial empire that had taken generations to build was collapsing like a house of cards. Throughout it all, I maintained my cover as Samantha Taylor. I continued to attend social events, make strategic investments, and build my reputation as a savvy businesswoman. To the outside world, I was completely disconnected from the drama surrounding the Thompsons. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating every move, watching with cold satisfaction as my plan unfolded. It was at one of these events that I had my first face-to-face confrontation with Jack since this all began. He cornered me at the bar, his eyes bloodshot, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "I know it's you," he hissed, his breath reeking of expensive scotch. "I don't know how you're doing it, but I know you're behind all of this." I met his gaze coolly, taking a sip of my champagne. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Jack. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit stressed. His hand shot out, gripping my arm tightly. Don't play games with me, Sarah. You've destroyed everything. My family, our business, our reputation. It's all gone. Are you happy now? For a moment I felt a flicker of the old pain, the old love. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes as he left me, the casual cruelty with which he had discarded our life together. My heart hardened. You seem to have me confused with someone else, Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice icy now. I suggest you remove your hand before I call security. He released me, stepping back as if burned. The look in his eyes was a mixture of fury and desperation. This isn't over, he growled before storming away. As I watched him go, I felt a surge of triumph. The mighty Jack Thompson reduced to a drunken, paranoid wreck. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. But even as I savored my victory, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Was this really justice, or had I crossed a line into something darker? The woman I used to be, the kind, compassionate teacher who believed in second chances, would have been horrified by what I had become. I pushed the thought aside. There was no room for doubt, not when I was so close to achieving my goal. The Thompsons had shown me no mercy, no compassion. Why should I extend any to them? As I left the event, I received a text from one of my informants. There was chatter that the FBI was preparing to move against the Thompsons. Indictments were being drawn up. The end was in sight. I smiled to myself as I slid into the back of my waiting car. The dominoes were falling, each one toppling the next in a cascade of destruction. Soon, there would be nothing left of the Thompson family's power and influence but ruins. And standing atop those ruins would be me, Samantha Taylor, risen from the ashes of Sarah Thompson, the architect of their downfall, the instrument of justice, long delayed but finally delivered. As my car glided through the nighttime streets, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The path I had chosen was not an easy one. It had required me to become someone I never thought I could be. Cold, calculating, ruthless. But looking at the results, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The game was nearly over, and I intended to savor every moment of my victory. As my car wound its way through the city streets, the glow of my recent triumph began to fade, replaced by a nagging sense of unease. I had come so far, orchestrated so much, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. My instincts, honed over the past year of careful planning and execution, were screaming at me to be on guard. Those instincts proved correct. The very next morning, I woke to a flurry of messages and missed calls, all from various contacts in my carefully cultivated network. The news they brought was unexpected and potentially game-changing. Mark Thompson, Jack's estranged cousin and black sheep of the family, had suddenly reappeared on the scene. I had been vaguely aware of Mark's existence during my research into the family, but he had seemed like a non-entity, cast out years ago for refusing to toe the family line and join the business. Now it appeared he was back and he was stirring things up. Mark had given an explosive interview to a major news outlet, corroborating many of the allegations against his family and adding new damning details. He painted a picture of a dynasty built on corruption, manipulation, and outright criminality, stretching back generations. First, I was elated. This was an unexpected ally. Someone from within the family itself turning against them. It lent credibility to all the evidence I had been carefully leaking. But as I dug deeper into Mark's sudden reappearance, elation turned to concern. Mark wasn't just talking to the press. He was meeting with federal investigators, promising to provide documents and testimony that could blow the case wide open. This should have been good news, but it presented a problem. Mark had information I didn't, details about family history and inner workings that I couldn't have known. If he took center stage in the investigation, it could derail my carefully laid plans. I needed to meet this unexpected ally, to gauge his motivations and see if I could steer him in a direction that aligned with my goals. Through my contacts, I arranged a meeting under the guise of being a potential investor in a new venture Mark was planning. We met at a quiet, upscale restaurant. Mark was younger than I expected, with the same chiseled good looks as Jack but with a rougher edge. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he shook my hand. "Miss Taylor," he said, a hint of a smirk playing at his lips. "I've heard a lot about you. The new rising star in the business world." I offered a practiced smile in return. And I've certainly been hearing a lot about you lately, Mr. Thompson. Your family must be quite surprised by your recent media appearances. His smirk widened into a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, I'm sure they are. But then they should have seen this coming for a long time. As our conversation progressed, I began to get a clearer picture of Mark Thompson. He was intelligent, charismatic, and driven by a deep-seated resentment towards his family. But there was something else, an underlying current of ambition that made me wary. You know, Mark said, leaning in conspiratorially, I've been watching everything that's been happening with the family. The leaked documents, the whistleblowers, the carefully orchestrated fall from grace. It's impressive work, almost as if someone's been pulling strings behind the scenes. I kept my face impassive, even as my heart rate picked up. The mighty do have a tendency to fall, I said noncommittally, especially when their foundation is built on lies. Mark's eyes glinted. Indeed they do. But I can't help but wonder what happens after the fall. Someone's bound to step in and pick up the pieces, someone who knows the whole story. It was at that moment that I realized Mark Thompson wasn't just an unexpected ally. He was a potential threat. He wasn't interested in justice or redemption. He saw the downfall of his family as an opportunity to seize power for himself. As I left the restaurant, my mind was racing. Mark's emergence had thrown a wrench into my carefully laid plans. He had information I didn't, connections I couldn't match, and a claim to the Thompson legacy that I could never have. If he took control of the narrative, everything I had worked for could be for nothing. But even as I grappled with this new obstacle, another unexpected development was unfolding. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The content made my blood run cold. I know who you are and what you're doing. We need to meet. Meet me at the old Thompson factory tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. My first instinct was to ignore it, to dismiss it as a trap. But something about the message, the choice of location, made me pause. The old Thompson factory had been the site of one of the family's earliest triumphs, long since abandoned and forgotten by most. It wasn't the kind of place an outsider would choose. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. But I wasn't going in unprepared. I reached out to Alex, my private investigator friend, and asked him to be on standby, ready to intervene if things went south. The next night, as I approached the dilapidated factory, every nerve in my body was on high alert. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the abandoned lot, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet. As I neared the entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized her. It was Eleanor Thompson, Jack's mother and the family matriarch. "Hello, Sarah," she said, her voice as cool and collected as ever. Or should I say, Samantha? We have a lot to discuss. For a moment I considered turning and running, but I stood my ground, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm listening," I said. Eleanor's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "You've been busy this past year, very busy indeed. I have to admit I underestimated you. We all did." "I'm not sure what you're talking about," I started to say, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Please, let's not insult each other's intelligence. I know exactly what you've been doing. The leaked documents, the whisper campaigns, the strategic revelations. It's quite impressive, really. You've dismantled in months what took generations to build." I remained silent, waiting to see where this was going. Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking every one of her years. "What you may not realize, Sarah, is that you and I have more in common than you might think. I too once found myself cast aside by this family, used and discarded when I was no longer convenient. This was not at all what I had expected. Eleanor had always seemed the perfect matriarch, the steel at the core of the Thompson family. But as she began to tell her story, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I knew. Eleanor, it turned out, had married into the Thompson family as a young woman like me. She had been dazzled by their wealth and charm, and like me, she had soon found herself trapped in a world of secrets, lies, and ruthless ambition. "I made a choice back then," Eleanor said, her eyes distant with memory. "I chose to fight from within, to play their game but on my own terms. I've spent decades building my own power base, my own network of allies and informants, and now I'm ready to bring it all crashing down." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Eleanor's gaze sharpened, focusing intently on me. Because, my dear, I'm offering you a choice. You can continue on your current path, dismantling the family piece by piece, or you can join forces with me, and we can destroy them in one fell swoop. As I stood there in the moonlight, facing the woman I had long considered my enemy, I realized that the game had changed once again. New allies, new obstacles, and a decision that could alter the course of everything I had worked for. The path forward was suddenly less clear, the outcome less certain. But one thing remained constant: my determination to see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. Eleanor's offer hung in the air between us, heavy with potential and danger. For a long moment I stood silent, my mind racing through the implications of this unexpected alliance. Could I trust her? Was this another manipulation, a last-ditch effort by the Thompsons to regain control of the situation? But as I looked into Eleanor's eyes, I saw something I recognized. A cold, hard determination born of years of resentment and careful planning. It was the same look I saw in the mirror every day. Why now? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper in the still night air. Why reach out to me after everything that's happened? Eleanor's lips curved into a wry smile. Because, my dear, you've done what I never could. You've brought them to their knees. But make no mistake, they're not defeated yet. Jack, Richard, the board members, they're planning something big, a last stand if you will. And I want to be there when it all comes crashing down. I considered her words carefully. An alliance with Eleanor could give me insider information, access to resources I couldn't dream of. But it also meant trusting someone who had been at the heart of the family's machinations for decades. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, still wary. A joint offensive, Eleanor replied, her eyes glinting with anticipation. I have information about a secret board meeting happening in 3 days. Every major player in the Thompson Empire will be there, trying to salvage what's left of their power. It's the perfect opportunity to confront them all at once, to lay bare every dirty secret and corrupt deal. The idea was tantalizing, a chance to face them all, to see the look in their eyes as their world crumbled around them. It was everything I had been working towards. And what do you get out of this? I pressed, still not fully trusting her motives. Eleanor's face hardened. Revenge, pure and simple. They took my youth, my dreams, twisted me into something I never wanted to be. I want to watch it all burn. In that moment I saw myself reflected in Eleanor. The pain, the anger, the all-consuming desire for retribution. It was a chilling realization. All right, I said finally. I'm in. But we do this my way. I've come too far to let anyone else take control now. Eleanor nodded, a look of respect flickering across her face. Agreed. Now let's plan our grand finale, shall we? The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor provided me with detailed information about the upcoming board meeting. Attendees, security measures, even the layout of the boardroom. I cross-referenced everything with my own sources, not willing to rely solely on her information. Meanwhile, I prepared my final dossier of evidence, every shred of proof I had gathered over the past year, every damning email and incriminating financial record, all compiled into one devastating package. On the morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my mirror, carefully applying my makeup like war paint. The woman who looked back at me was a far cry from the broken, betrayed wife I had been a year ago. Today I was Samantha Taylor, avenging angel come to deliver justice. Eleanor and I met outside the imposing Thompson corporate headquarters. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there was a fierce gleam in her eye that belied her calm exterior. Ready? She asked, offering me a small conspiratorial smile. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. Let's finish this. We strode into the building together, our heels clicking in unison on the marble floor. The security guards, recognizing Eleanor, waved us through without question. As we rode the elevator to the top floor, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment everything had been building towards. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. I saw shock, confusion, and then dawning horror on the faces of the assembled Thompson elite as they recognized me. Jack, sitting at his father's right hand, went pale. What is the meaning of this? Richard Thompson bellowed, rising to his feet. Eleanor, what are you doing here? And with her? Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. Sit down, Richard. It's time we had a family meeting. Before anyone could react, I stepped forward, dropping my thick dossier on. Toi hiroi. De la bandike va viet lai theophong catch dien jai and imo rong ne sang ting amai. I slammed my hands on the polished boardroom table, the sound echoing through the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the board. I began, my voice steady and clear, projecting confidence. My name is Sarah Thompson. Some of you may remember me as Jack's wife. Others may know me as Samantha Taylor, the up-and-coming businesswoman. Today, however, I'm here in my true role. The architect of your downfall. The room erupted into chaos. Jack lunged towards me, but Eleanor smoothly stepped into his path, blocking him. I wouldn't do that if I were you, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, a subtle threat underlying her words. I raised my voice over the commotion, demanding attention. In this file, I announced, holding up the damning evidence, is proof of every illegal deal, every corrupt practice, every dirty secret the Thompson family has been hiding for generations. Financial fraud, tax evasion, bribery, and yes, even murder. At the word murder, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Richard, whose face had gone ashen, betraying his guilt. You've built your empire on the backs of others. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, fueled by years of suppressed anger. You've crushed anyone who stood in your way, used and discarded people like they were nothing. Well, today is the day you answer for it all. I turned to Jack, meeting his eyes for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The man I had once loved looked small and pathetic now, his expensive suit unable to hide the fear that consumed him. You thought you could use me and throw me away, I said, my voice low and intense, each word a carefully aimed dart. You thought I was weak, that I would just disappear. You were wrong. Eleanor stepped forward then, her presence commanding the room's attention, a lifetime of suppressed resentment radiating from her. For years I've watched this family rot from the inside out, she declared, her voice filled with a controlled fury. I've played my part, bided my time, but no more. It ends today. Richard finally found his voice, his face contorted with rage. You treacherous bitch. He spat at Eleanor, the word laced with venom. After everything I've given you. Everything you've given me? Eleanor cut him off, her laugh bitter and cold, devoid of any warmth. You've given me nothing but years of misery and shame. Well, now I'm taking it all back. As if on cue, the boardroom doors burst open. A team of FBI agents flooded in, led by a grim-faced man in a dark suit. Richard Thompson, the lead agent, announced, his voice authoritative. You and your associates are under arrest for a litany of charges, including fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Board members were handcuffed and led away, their protests and denials falling on deaf ears. I watched with a sense of surreal detachment as Jack was escorted out, his eyes meeting mine one last time, a look of defeat, a final understanding passing between us. As the room emptied, I found myself standing alone with Eleanor. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving me feeling oddly hollow, a void where rage had once resided. It's over, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears, as if I were speaking from a great distance. Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. No, my dear, she said softly, a hint of excitement in her tone. It's just beginning. The world is about to change, and we're the ones who changed it. As we walked out of the boardroom together, leaving behind the ruins of the Thompson Empire, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Triumph, yes, but also a profound sense of loss. The quest that had consumed my life for the past year was over. The question now was, who was I without my revenge? But as we stepped into the sunlight outside the Thompson building, I realized that Eleanor was right. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. I had torn down an empire of corruption and greed. Now I had the chance to build something better in its place. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. As Eleanor and I stepped out of the Thompson building, we were immediately engulfed by a sea of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. The news of the arrests had spread like wildfire, and the media frenzy was in full swing, everyone eager to capture the moment. We pushed through the crowd, neither of us willing to comment at this stage, the shock of the day still settling in. We made our way to a nearby cafe, seeking a moment of quiet to process what had happened, to find some semblance of peace amidst the storm. As we sat down with our coffees, Eleanor looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "You did it, Sarah," she said softly. "You brought them down. How does it feel?" I stared into my coffee, struggling to put my emotions into words, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders. "I'm not sure," I admitted, the truth hanging in the air between us. Part of me feels triumphant, vindicated. But there's also this emptiness I didn't expect. Eleanor nodded knowingly, understanding the complexities of my emotions. Revenge is a curious thing. It consumes you, drives you forward, but once it's achieved, it leaves a void, she explained. Her words resonated deeply. For so long, my entire existence had been focused on this singular goal. Now that it was accomplished, I felt adrift, unsure of my next move, lost at sea. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings, press conferences, and endless questions. The fall of the Thompson Empire was the biggest story of the year, possibly the decade. Every news outlet wanted an exclusive. Every prosecutor wanted my testimony, eager to capitalize on the scandal. I watched from a distance as the family I had once been a part of was systematically dismantled. Jack, Richard, and several board members were facing lengthy prison sentences. The Thompson companies were in free fall, their stock prices plummeting as investors rushed to distance themselves from the scandal, hoping to escape the fallout. But amidst the chaos, I found myself increasingly withdrawn. The satisfaction I had expected to feel was overshadowed by a growing sense of unease, a gnawing question that refused to be silenced. Had I become the very thing I despised in my quest for justice? Had I sacrificed my own integrity to achieve my goals? It was during this time of introspection that I received an unexpected visitor. Alex, my old friend and private investigator, showed up at my apartment one evening, concern etched on his face, his presence a welcome comfort. "Sarah," he said as I let him in, his voice filled with worry. "I've been worried about you. How are you holding up?" I managed a weak smile, attempting to reassure him. "I'm fine, Alex. It's just a lot to process." He studied me for a moment, his gaze unwavering, then shook his head. "You're not fine. I can see it in your eyes. This whole thing, it's eaten away at you." His words struck a chord, and suddenly the emotions I had been suppressing came flooding out, overwhelming me. I found myself pouring out my conflicted feelings to Alex, the triumph mixed with guilt, the satisfaction tainted by a sense of loss. I spent so long being Samantha Taylor. I confessed, the weight of my deception heavy on my heart, playing this role that I'm not sure who Sarah is anymore. I achieved everything I set out to do, but at what cost? Alex listened patiently, his presence a comforting reminder of the person I used to be, before the darkness consumed me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking, carefully choosing his words. "Sarah," he said gently, his voice filled with compassion, "what you did was incredible. You exposed corruption, you brought criminals to justice. But revenge can't be the end of your story. It's what you do next that really matters." His words struck a chord deep within me. For so long I had been focused on tearing down the Thompsons. Perhaps now it was time to start building something of my own, to create a legacy that was not defined by vengeance. Over the next few weeks I began to reevaluate my life and my choices, searching for a new path forward. I started by reaching out to Janet, the journalist who had been instrumental in exposing the Thompson family's misdeeds, her relentless pursuit of the truth inspiring me. Together we began working on a book that would tell the full story of the Thompson Empire's rise and fall, a cautionary tale of greed and corruption. Writing the book was a cathartic experience. It allowed me to process everything that had happened, to see the events of the past year with a new perspective. As I recounted my journey from betrayed wife to avenging force, I began to reconnect with the person I used to be. The idealistic teacher who believed in justice and second chances, the woman I had almost lost. But I wasn't content with just telling the story. I wanted to do more, to make a positive impact with the knowledge and resources I had gained. That's when the idea struck me. A foundation dedicated to helping victims of corporate fraud and supporting whistleblowers, giving a voice to those who had been silenced. I threw myself into this new project with the same determination, I had once applied to my revenge, channeling my energy into something positive. I used my connections as Samantha Taylor to secure funding and support.
The Sarah Thompson Foundation quickly gained traction, becoming a beacon of hope for those who had been wronged by powerful corporations, offering them resources and a path to justice. As the foundation grew, I found myself spending more time in my old neighborhood, working with community organizations and schools, reconnecting with the people I had left behind. It was during one of these visits that I ran into Tom, a fellow teacher from my old school, a familiar face from my past. "Sarah," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with surprise, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Sarah Thompson? Is that really you?" I felt a moment of panic, my instincts screaming at me to retreat into my Samantha Taylor persona, to hide behind the mask I had created. But I took a deep breath and smiled, deciding to embrace the moment. "Tom, it's me." We talked for hours, catching up on everything that had happened, the years melting away as we reminisced about old times. Tom listened with amazement as I gave him a condensed version of my story, glossing over some of the more difficult details. When I finished, he shook his head in disbelief, overwhelmed by everything I had been through. "I always knew you were strong, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "But this is incredible. You've been through so much, and yet here you are, still trying to make the world a better place." His words touched something deep inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Sarah again. Not the naive woman I had been before, but a stronger, wiser version of myself, forged in the fires of adversity. As the months passed, I gradually stepped back from my Samantha Taylor persona. I didn't abandon her entirely. She was a part of me now, a reminder of what I was capable of. But I no longer needed her as a shield against the world. I had found my own strength, my own purpose.
1 year after the fall of the Thompson Empire, I stood on a stage, preparing to give a speech at a charity gala for the foundation, my heart filled with a sense of anticipation and purpose. As I looked out over the crowd, I saw faces both familiar and new, a testament to the journey I had taken. Alex was there, beaming with pride, his support unwavering. Janet sat with her notepad, ready to document the event, her dedication to the truth inspiring. And in the back, almost hidden in the shadows, I spotted Eleanor, giving me a small nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement of the path we had both taken. As I began to speak, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, the culmination of everything I had been through. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with pain and darkness, but standing there, I realized that every step had led me to this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice strong and clear, filled with conviction. "My name is Sarah Thompson. A year ago I stood in the shadows, driven by a need for revenge. Today I stand before you in the light, guided by a desire to make a difference." As I continued my speech, outlining the foundation's goals and achievements, I felt the last pieces of my old self falling into place. The broken woman who had been remade into an instrument of vengeance had finally found her true purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. I had torn down an empire built on lies and corruption. Now I had the chance to build something meaningful in its place. As I concluded my speech to thunderous applause, I knew that this was not the end of my story. It was a new beginning full of possibility and hope. And whatever came next, I was ready to face it as my true self. Sarah Thompson, stronger and wiser, but still believing in the power of justice and redemption.